All right, doxology. Hey, good morning. You guys good today? Good. Grab a Bible if you got one. Meet me in John chapter 5. John chapter 5 is where we're going to be today. Page 727 in the Bibles that look like this. If you need to borrow a Bible today, either to get a head start or because you don't have a Bible, grab one of these. You can borrow that. You can keep it. That's why we put them there. Page 727 in those. John chapter 5 is where we're going to be today. So this is week 2 of a series that we're calling the Unanswered Questions of Jesus. If you were here last week, you know that we talked about how there's this moment between the asking of a really great question and its answer where a whole world hangs in the balance. You remember that? So it's true of all of the greatest questions that we ask, and especially the questions that we ask in relationships, starting really young, right? Will you go out with me? Check yes or no. You ask the question, you wait for an answer, and while you wait for an answer to a really great relationship question, your world hangs in the balance. Will you marry me? Same deal. Even when you're in relationship and you find yourself asking a question, hey, is there anything you haven't told me? In between the asking of a really great question and its answer, you realize a whole world hangs in the balance. Because there's something about the asking of a question and the moment while you wait that you realize a person's defining and declaring something about the relationship, something about their identity and who they believe that you are. They're determining something about their next steps and your next steps from this moment. The moment between the asking of a really great question and its answer, the whole world hangs in the balance. So is it any wonder, this is what we said last week, that Jesus asked so many questions? Jesus is almost universally accepted as the greatest teacher of all time, even by people who don't believe what he taught. And Jesus asked twice as many direct questions of people that he answered, because he realized there's something in a moment between asking a great question of a person and hearing its answer that a person has to define and declare who they believe they are and who they believe you are, and determine the next steps that they're going to take from a moment like that. The moment between a really great question and its answer, when a whole world hangs in the balance. What we've seen as we're looking at these biggest questions that Jesus asked is that the people that wrote them down didn't believe that they were just questions for a person 2,000 years ago that Jesus looked in the eye and asked a question. They were that, but they weren't just that. These eyewitnesses wrote this down because as they were watching these moments unfold, they listened to the question and realized that's not just a question for him, that's a question for me. And I tell you what, I'm going to write it down because it's not just a question for me, it's a question for you. So we're asking the question. And in the moment between the asking of the question and our answer, the whole world hangs in the balance. Got you in John chapter 5 this morning. John's a guy that wrote the book. He was one of Jesus' closest friends. In fact, you might even be able to make the argument that John was Jesus' very best friend on the earth. And he wrote down this eyewitness account of everything that he saw Jesus do and experience while he was walking with Jesus, because over the 3.5 years that John walked with Jesus, John became completely convinced that Jesus, this person he spent almost every waking moment of his life for 3.5 years with, was God in flesh, who came to offer life with a capital L to everyone who would receive it. John wanted you to know in hopes that you would receive it by coming to put your trust in him just like he had. Last week we saw in John chapter 2 the kind of story that Jesus loves to get involved in. He asks his own mom, "Why do you involve me?" He says and shows, I love to get involved in stories that fill people who are empty, to help people who are hopeless. I love to get involved in the kind of story that covers the shame of people who are right in the worst moments of their life, to take care of their guilt, to fill their cups, to bring eternal joy to the celebration. That's the kind of story I love to get involved in. That's what Jesus says. That's what John came to believe. When you turn the page from John chapter 2, where we were last week, you see John chapter 3. Jesus encounters a man named Nicodemus. Nicodemus was a spiritual insider. He was a guy who kept all of the rules. He had life together. He would have been wealthy and influential and powerful in all of the religious world. And Jesus comes to this really great guy and says, unless you have life that starts with a capital L, you don't have life at all. He goes on to tell Nicodemus, God so loved the world, and he gave his only son. Whoever believes in him won't perish, but has everlasting life. John tells us that's why Jesus came. That's what he offered to a person like Nicodemus. Walks away from Nicodemus, and he encounters this woman who was a moral outcast. In a lot of ways, she was the absolute opposite of Nicodemus. Nicodemus was a spiritually inside man. She was a morally outcast woman, the kind of person who, for various reasons in her life, she found herself going to draw water in the middle of the day when nobody else would go to draw water because she just couldn't handle being around all of the other people and the things they would say and the ways they would look at her and the shame that she felt for the life that she'd lived. She spent her whole life trying to quench a thirst, and she couldn't seem to quench. And Jesus offered her living water. He offered her hope, forgiveness. She offered to give her the life back. Right after that, Jesus encounters a Roman centurion. In some ways, he's not like either of the previous two, and in some ways, he's just like both of them. He was not a spiritual insider. He was a spiritual outcast. He worked for the Romans. Spiritual outcast just like the woman at the well. But he was wealthy. He was influential. He had power, just like Nicodemus. And yet he had a problem that even in all of his power and all of his wealth and all of his influence, he couldn't fix. And Jesus offered him life. It's like John's in these first several chapters saying to those of us who read over and over and over, everyone can get in on this. Wherever you've been, whatever you've done, whatever you have, whatever you don't have, this is someone you need. And you can get in on this. That brings us to John chapter 5. Jesus encounters yet another person along the way, and he asks him a really important question. Even if at first glance it doesn't even seem like a particularly good question. In fact, you remember growing up, your parents or your teachers, they'd try to encourage you to be curious, and so they would always encourage you, there's no such thing as a dumb question. When we get into this story, we're going to see a question that Jesus asks of a person that certainly seems to qualify as a really dumb question. But here's what I think we're going to see as we look at this story. Not only is it not a dumb question, it's the very best question Jesus could have asked this person. And it may be the very best question that Jesus could ask you. And yet it leads in this story, John chapter 5, to what might be the very saddest miracle in the entire Bible. And that's important because the truth is some of us, maybe a lot of us, are in danger of finding ourselves in the same spot today if we leave the question unanswered. Look at the story with me. John chapter 5, beginning in verse 1. John chapter 5, beginning in verse 1. John's writing, eyewitness account. Here's what he says. Sometime later, after Jesus healed the Roman centurion's son, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals. Now, there is in Jerusalem, near the sheep gate, a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, means house of mercy. That's ironic, you're going to see as the story continues to go on. And which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here, a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, and the paralyzed. So I want to just point out a couple of things in the story along the way so you get the sights and the smells of the scene as we move on to the question that Jesus gets ready to ask, okay? So Jesus is in Jerusalem, John tells us, for one of the Jewish festivals. They had several, and they would travel into Jerusalem whenever the festival was there, and they would go to feast together or to fast together. They would go to worship together, and they would go to celebrate and to offer sacrifices. That was part of what they did during the festivals. People from all of the surrounding areas would come together during those festivals. And it says that there's this gate right in the walls of the city. And actually, if you've ever been to Jerusalem, you know there are several gates in the wall to the city of Jerusalem, but one in particular is a gate that's called the sheep gate. And it was the gate through which would travel sheep. As the shepherds would bring them into Jerusalem for the festivals or for sacrifice in the temple, the sheep would travel through this gate. It was the gate to the city from the fields where the sheep were kept. And there near this gate, the sheep gate, there was a pool that John tells us was called Bethesda, the house of mercy. And yet, like I told you, it's ironic because it's not, as we come to see, actually the house of mercy. It's a place for people that don't have a house where they find misery and they commiserate together. Right there near this gate, there's a pool, John tells us. But don't think resort-style swimming pool where people would come together in chlorinated, pristine water and lounge around, catch some rays, and relax, drink little umbrella drinks all throughout the rest of the day. Think stock tank. This was the pool by the sheep gate where the shepherds, as they would bring in their sheep to take them towards sacrifice, realized they needed to be unblemished sheep. They would rinse them off from the journey in the sheep pool there by the sheep gate called Bethesda. So just think about what that pool would have looked like. Think about what it would have smelled like, especially around feast time when the demand for sacrifices was high. Add to the fact that John tells us there were 5 covered architectural elements that provided a little bit of shade for the people who didn't have a place to get out of the sun on a hot day. People that didn't have shelter could come and find shelter. Becomes this gathering place for people that don't have a place. For one reason or another, people that were social outcasts. People who were outcasts because of a disease like leprosy, coronavirus. It was the place they'd be quarantined, the place they'd be put together, the place they'd be kept separate, miserable. It was the place they were sent. You got to have in your mind the sight, the sound, the smell of the scene as John continues the story. All right, look down at verse 4. John chapter 5, verse 4. Somebody read verse 4. I don't seem to have verse 4. No wonder we give these Bibles away. They're missing verses, right? Are you guys missing verse 4? All right, let me tell you what's happened here because it's actually really, really cool and I think will inspire some confidence that the Bible that you're reading is the Bible that was written, okay? The verses didn't come into the story until somewhere around the 16th century. Somebody wanted to create a concordance so that they could go find proof text and support their arguments for different places. They want to make it easier to find, and so they didn't put those in until later. But here's what happens. Every once in a while, and really it seems like every week or two, archaeologists who are studying and digging in Israel and the surrounding lands, they will uncover an ancient manuscript. And as they do that, especially over the last 50 to 100 years, the technology, which not only allows them to discover it and preserve it, it allows them to date it, and it allows it to compare it to all of the other manuscripts that we've got. And every once in a while, and it's really shocking actually how infrequent these moments are, they'll uncover an ancient manuscript that doesn't have a verse, or doesn't have a word, or has a different word or a different letter. Generally, like in this case, it's really simple to figure out why. What happened here is as a scribe was copying this story down, he realized the people that don't know about the sheep gate, the people that don't know the story surrounding this story, are going to have some questions about why the person takes the step that the person takes in the very next verse, in verse 5. And so I'll just put in parentheses, it's called a scribal emendation. It's something that he just added sort of in parentheses as commentary, like some of you have in your study Bibles. He just added it out to the side. And then a person came to copy his manuscript, and a person came to copy his manuscript, and a person came to copy his manuscript. They included it in there. Later on, we included it in the passage. Now, the note is probably accurate, but we've uncovered enough ancient manuscripts over the years to know that John didn't write those words. So even though the note is accurate, because we want to make sure that the version that we read together today is letter for letter what John wrote, not something that's been changed or edited or transformed along the way, they made a note and left it out. Again, that ought to give you confidence, not shoot your confidence, that the Bible that you're reading today is letter for letter what John wrote. When you look at the Old Testament, it's letter for letter what Jesus read. Because the more manuscripts that we find, the fewer of these there are, the more confidence we have. So the scribe gives us a note to tell us why the person took the step that he was going to take. Here's what he does. He tells us that there was this tradition, this superstition, that an angel would come down and stir the water. And as long as the angel was still in the pool, stirring the water of the pool, a person who got in the pool at that moment would find healing from whatever disease they suffered from. We don't actually know if it ever happened. We just know it was a superstition. Probably it was one of those urban legend kind of things that people say happened to somebody one time, but nobody ever really knew if it ever happened to anybody anytime. And so as a result, some underwater spring would cause this water to bubble, or the wind would ripple across the stock tank and cause the water to ripple. And all of the people that were surrounding the pool would dive into the pool, or flop into the pool, or jump into the pool, trying to be the first to get there before the angel left. And time after time after time, they got back out of the pool, retold the story. We just missed it by that much. It's really a desperate, hopeless picture that you get around this pool. Okay, look at verse 5. The story goes on. One person who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. Okay, we don't know how old he is. We don't know how long he's been by the pool. We don't know why he's not been able to walk or take care of himself. All we know is what John tells us. He's been an invalid for 38 years. Okay, look what happens. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he'd been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, okay, here's the question. You ready? Do you want to get well? Which is a question that's ridiculous to the point of being offensive, isn't it? I mean, I don't know if you've ever been sick, like really sick. You imagine someone coming up to you in a moment like that? I have. Asking you, you want to get well? He's been unable to walk for 38 years, and he's resorted, his last hope is to lay by this petri dish of a stock tank around all of the other people who are sick and hope that he can be the first one to get into the pool in hopes that maybe he can make a miracle happen in his life. Like, are there other reasons that a person would have for jumping into a stock tank like that? Who wouldn't want to get well? You know what the answer to the question is? This guy doesn't want to get well. He just wants to be able to walk. And listen, those are not the same thing. He doesn't want to be whole. He just wants to be a little less broken. Look how the story continues. Jesus asks the question, and it goes unanswered. The guy doesn't tell him an answer to the question. Instead, he gives Jesus all the reasons that he's not well already. Look what he says, verse 7. Sir, the invalid replied, I have no one to help me into the pool when the water's stirred. While I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me. He says, okay, I want a miracle. I want to walk. But I don't have what it takes to make it happen. There's always someone faster. There's always someone stronger. There's always someone with a little more help, with a little more support than me. I'm trying all I know how to try. But all I'm trying isn't working. You stop right there. Don't miss this or you'll miss the point of the story, the best part of this story. The man's not just describing him, is he? He's describing some of us. He's describing some of the people that we love. It's easy to look at this story and believe we got nothing in common with this guy. John sees the story and writes the story because he believes we have everything in common with this guy. Maybe it's not that we've been unable to walk for 38 years, but all of us have an unquenchable thirst. All of us have an unsolvable problem. All of us have something that's limiting us, that's holding us down, that's holding us back. It's keeping us from life with a capital L. Do you know what yours is? A point of pain in our life. We've tried over and over and over to get to go away. And we keep coming up short. We've tried. And all we've tried hasn't worked. Some of you, it's a pain point or limitation in your physical body. Some of you, it's a pain point in your marriage. Some of you would love to have a pain point in your marriage. You're lonely. That's the pain point for you. Some of it's a financial pain point, a tension that you're always facing in your finances. Never seems to go away. Some of you, it's a pain point with your kids, a broken relationship with a parent. Some of you, it's something like depression or anxiety, addiction, isolation, fear, isolation, abandonment, guilt, shame. It's holding you down. It's holding your back. And you tried to get through it. You tried to get over it. You tried to get past it. But you just can't quite seem to get enough help. You can't quite seem to get enough strength. Can't quite seem to get enough momentum to get anywhere but right back in the middle of it. And just like this man, if Jesus asked you, do you want to get well? You'd answer, I've tried. I'm trying. But everything I'm trying, it's not working. Keep reading, look what happens. Verse 8. Then Jesus said to him, get up, pick up your mat, and walk. At once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked. All I'm trying isn't working was all Jesus needed to start working. And this man starts walking. But pay attention. You can't stop there, because that's not the point of the story. If you just read that far in the story, you'll miss the point of the story and actually end up worse than you started in the story. The point of the story isn't just let go and let God. Once you really, really do, all your problems will go away. If you'll just look to Jesus, then your marriage will be instantly fixed. If you'll just look to Jesus, all your financial problems will go away. Your prodigal children will come home. You'll find a spouse or a friend. You'll pass all your classes and graduate with honors. You'll never want another drink again. That's not the point. That's not the promise of the story. If you stop here, you'll turn trusting Jesus into nothing more than a superstition. The same kind of superstition that kept a whole bunch of people in a place of misery trying to swan dive into a stock tank and filthy sheep. In fact, you'll find yourself further away from hope and help and wholeness that you need than you've ever been before, which is exactly what happens to this guy in the story. Jesus tells the guy to stand up, put the weight of his trust in the strength of Jesus' promise, to pick up his mat, which means losing his place in the superstition line, sort of like season tickets for football games, right? He's been doing this a long time. After 38 years, he's got to have a pretty good place by the pool. He's walking away from it. But he's walking away from it. In a moment, in an instant, these muscles that hadn't flexed in 38 years suddenly gained the strength for him to stand. He is literally holding the mat that has been holding him for the last 38 years. And he walks. But look where he goes. Verse 9. Once the man was cured, he picked up his mat and walked. The day on which this took place was a Sabbath, and so the Jewish leaders had said to the man who had been healed, "It's the Sabbath. The law forbids you to carry your mat." How would you expect the religious leaders to respond in a moment like this? There's no celebration, there's no dancing, there's no giving thanks, there's no video crew to shoot the story to use as an illustration of a future sermon series. They look at the man and say, "Hey, you're breaking the rules. The rules that we've set to keep you from breaking the rules." And that's what they were. They'd taken all of God's law And then they'd added laws to God's law to keep you from accidentally breaking God's law. So if you think of God's law as a cliff, they'd built a fence. And they built a fence to keep you from going over the fence, and another fence, and another fence, and another fence. And when it came to God's law, remember the Sabbath day, fence number 437 said you can't carry a mat on the Sabbath day. Look how the guy responds. Rather than saying, you guys have developed a system that keeps broken people broken, why don't you go take a flying leap into the sheep pool? Guy looks at them and says, the guy who told me to stand up after 38 years told me to pick up my mat. Take it up with him. So they say, happy to do that. Where is he? John tells us Jesus had slipped away. The guy doesn't know where Jesus is. Can I just ask you a question? Like, how does the guy not know where Jesus is? Put yourself in his shoes, which are finally getting wear after 38 years. How do you not keep your eye on Jesus and follow him wherever he slips away? Isn't that stunning? Shocking. And it's really important to the story. He's not looking for Jesus because his problem's been fixed. But look at verse 14. Jesus comes looking for him because he's still not well. Verse 14, later Jesus found him at the temple and said, see, you're well again. Stop sinning or something worse could happen to you. Feels a little insensitive? Hey, some of you are just joining community group. You're experiencing community group for the very first time. Okay, imagine walking in for the second time this week and somebody that you've just recently met looks you in the eye and says, stop sinning. Something really bad could happen to you. Like, come on, Jesus. You just met the guy. Don't miss what Jesus is doing here. This is not a threat. It's not primarily an accusation. This is primarily an invitation from Jesus. Notice how general the statement is. Notice what Jesus doesn't say to him. He doesn't say when he finds the person at the temple, he doesn't say to this guy, hey, stop looking at porn. Something worse could happen to you. It's not that specific. He doesn't say, stop getting drunk or something worse will happen to you. Stop telling little white lies to make people accept you. Something worse will happen to you. Stop cussing so much. Something worse will happen to you. Does what he said include one of those things? Possibly. I don't know. I don't know the guy. I just know me. And what is included in that statement for me? You don't know the guy. You just know you. You know what's included in the statement for you. Is it limited to one of those things? It's not. It can include anything because it includes everything. Jesus says, hey, stop sinning. Something worse could happen. Okay, so put yourself in that guy's shoes. What's the response? Just think about the sinning that you're doing these days. Not something you did one time way in the past. It's over. You're not doing it anymore. The thing that you're struggling with today. The things that you struggle with in your life that you wish you didn't do, but you find yourself doing, and you say you're not going to do anymore, but you keep on doing. You don't want to do it, but you do it. You know you shouldn't do it. Okay, you know what that is? You got that thing in your mind? Okay. Stop it. What would you say? Stop it. I'm trying to stop it. I can't stop it. I've tried everything to stop it. I don't have anybody to help me. I'm not strong enough. I don't have enough support. I'm not quick enough. I'm not close enough. I'm trying. And all I'm trying isn't working. See what Jesus is doing? He's asking a different version of the exact same question he asked at the very beginning that the guy never answered. Jesus is saying, I didn't ask you if you wanted to walk. I asked you, do you want to get well? And you still haven't answered my question. Jesus is inviting the same response for an even deeper level of brokenness. He's saying, I can do better than just taking the thing that's currently holding you down and help you up. I can take the thing that's breaking you and make you whole. I can take the thing that's killing you and let you live. So let me ask you again. Do you want to get well? You want to see something tragic? Look at verse 15. The man went away, walking, and told the Jewish leaders that it was Jesus who'd made him well. And it throws Jesus into this intense time of persecution because the man who could walk went out and informed on him, but didn't want to be well. He's standing in front of the man who helped him stand. And he walks away without what he really needs. Have you ever considered that maybe the worst thing that could happen to you would be for you to get better before you get well? That a person could have just enough Jesus to be comfortable, just enough healing to forget that you're still dying, just enough to mask the symptoms of sin in a sin-cursed world, even while it continues to destroy you. See, don't misunderstand the point of the story. The point of the story is not to make a promise that if you trust in Jesus for life with a capital L, he will automatically fix all your pain. Jesus is able to fix your pain. He's able to make you walk. He's able to heal your marriage, to heal your addiction, to send you a friend, to get you through pre-calculus, to bring your prodigal child back home, restore you in a relationship with your parents. He's able to fix the pain. He can, and he may. But the story isn't here to promise that he will immediately. It's to remind you and to remind me that a fix for our temporary problems may not be the best gift that he has to offer. The point of the story is this: whether or not he fixes your marriage or your finances or your loneliness, whatever your point of pain is, whether or not he's made you walk, don't walk away until you've let him make you well. Some of you coming to this morning, this is your story. You've got an unquenchable thirst. You got an unsolvable problem. You've tried everything to fix it. You're not trying to get somebody to throw you into a disease-infested stock tank trying to make you well. That's not your point of pain. That's not your solution. But you're trying to solve your loneliness by fishing on Tinder. And it's not working. Trying to solve your emptiness problem by scrolling through porn. Trying to solve the point of pain in your marriage. Point of pain in your life by numbing it or drowning it, some kind of substance. You've tried spending more time at work, spending more time apart, more time at the gym. Done everything you can to make yourself well. And all you're trying is still not working. And Jesus is looking at you this morning with a question. And your whole world hangs in the balance between the question and your answer. See, Jesus wants to make you better than better. He wants to make you whole. He doesn't want to do for you what you could do for yourself if you just had a little more strength or a little more time or a few more resources, a little more help. He wants to do something that only he can do. He wants to make you new. He wants to forgive your sins. He wants to make you clean. He wants to come to live with you and near you, within you. He wants to give you life with a capital L, life that's truly life, and hope and meaning and purpose and power. You can't find any other way. This man walks off the pages of John chapter 5, and he never answers the question, as far as we know. There's an unanswered question that's hanging in the air. We don't ever hear what happened to him. We don't know if he came back. We don't know if he walked away. We don't know if he got well or just walked for a little while, a few more years, and went into a hopeless eternity. At the end of the chapter, the question that Jesus asked is still unanswered. Why? Why wouldn't John resolve the story? Because he believes that the question was not just a question for him. It's a question for you. A question for me. Do you want to be well? Will you pray with me? It's possible this morning that you realize that his story is your story. And it's time. You've been hanging around the margins of Jesus, listening to the stories of Jesus, hearing the questions of Jesus, and settling on everybody else giving answers. But this morning it's time for you to answer the question. And the question isn't, do you want Jesus to fix your problem? The question isn't, do you want Jesus to just make you feel a little better, remove the symptoms? The question is, do you want to be made well? And the truth is, Jesus came to the earth and lived the life that you were supposed to live. And he took brokenness on himself, your brokenness, as he hung on a cross and he died. But your brokenness and your guilt and your shame went into a grave, and 3 days later he walked out without it and offers to give you life in him, life with a capital L. Forgiveness and hope and power, his presence from this moment on for the rest of your life. And he offers it to you as a gift, and if you've never received the gift, you can receive it in this moment, right this second. And it's as simple as telling him that you'll receive the gift, that you'll answer the question. You've tried everything you know to do, but you want to get well. Lord, for that person in this moment who's receiving the gift of life, I pray that you would give them strength, courage, and power. Lord, I pray that you would fix their problem. But even more than that, that they would learn what it's like to live an abundant life, a whole life, a full life that leans on you even in the places that we're weak, and finds perhaps like Jacob in the Old Testament, Paul in the New Testament, that even our places of weakness are places of strength when you're the one who holds us up and gives us life. Lord, for some of us who have forgotten, I pray that you would remind us who you are, what you've done, and that even in our moments of pain, we would want more for you, from you, than just to be fixed. We love to be well and to live whole lives, the rest of our life, and into eternal life, the presence of a Savior who gives life in the present tense. We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.